In a dry and forgotten corner of Castilla-La Mancha, where the sun goes down heavy on earth and the silence is confused with resignation, lived Isaac, a 5-year-old boy, years with eyes too serious for his age. Since the death of his mother, his world had been reduced to the dusty farm where he lived with his father and a woman who never wanted to pronounce his name. It wasn't his mother, not even pretended to be. For her, Isaac was a burden, a mistake that life had made on her, thrown. Without asking permission, the orders were dry, silent blows, and words when they arrived, they hurt more than the belt. "If your mother hadn't dead, I wouldn't have to carry with you," he said. A time just before the leather-cutty air. Isaac didn't cry, he didn't scream, he just squeezed the lips and looked. He ground, like who has understood too soon that there are things that cannot be changed. The only one place where it seemed less dense was the stable, old and full of cracks, but also of secrets that only those who know shut up they can understand. There I spent hours with Rocio, a mere old woman with fur ash, and with Zorn, a dog rescuer retired that barely moved. But that did not take away the eyes above. Zorn had arrived at the farm years, brought by Grandpa before he died. No one took care of him, but he didn't leave either. He became in the faithful shadow of Isaac, his only witness, his guardian silent. Among the three, a wordless pact was born. Isaac spoke little, almost nothing, but Zorn didn't need to, and Rocio, with her snorting calm, it seemed understand too. In that corner where nobody looked, 3 souls were broken every day without saying anything, and that was enough. The routine on the farm, it was always the same. Isaac would get up before dawn, drag his little body to the kitchen to warm up the stale bread from the day before, and then he went to the well. With a bucket that weighed more than him, sometimes he stumbled, sometimes fell, but he didn't complain. He knew that any sign of weakness was punished with double work or silence. Ice cream, that hurt the same. The woman, because never called her mom, was in charge of reminding him every day that I was not loved there. "Eat and don't bother us," he said. And if Isaac was late more than due in returning from the stable, I was waiting for him, a broom behind the door too. Therefore his step turned stealthy, measured. He walked as he floor could break, as if his existence was a mistake that had to be made to dissimulate. A Thursday in the afternoon, while Isaac was caressing Hirocio's neck, heard a noise different from usual. Zorn pricked up his ears, attentive, and then ran towards the entrance of the farm with the agility that no one else, I believed, that even had. Isaac followed him in silence, dirty, with knees scraped and hands stained with dirt. Since behind a stone pillar, saw how a grey car stopped in front of the house. He came down one woman with hair chestnut updo and glasses thick. I had a file in the hand and a look that did not seem scared. "I'm Inspector Biner," she said firmly. The woman of the house took a while in react, forced a smile and invited her in as who she fears being discovered. Isaac didn't understand. That meant that visit, but felt a tingling sensation in his chest. And Zorn, who didn't use to rely in no one, did not move away from the door. Biner was not new in that kind of visits. There were route more than 20 farms so far this year, and already knew when something didn't fit. As soon as he set foot inside the house, he noticed his musty smell, cleanliness hurried and tense suspended in the air. He asked the routine questions, looked at the walls without photos, the kitchen without drawings, children, and then asked to Isaac. The woman, somewhat annoyed, said that the child was in a stable, which he liked the animals. "He is quiet but very obedient," he added, as that was enough. Biner didn't answer. He walked to the barn guided by Zorn's content, which was forward, and turned every so often asking him to hurry. When he arrived, he found the child shrunken in a corner, stroking the mare's mane. He didn't look up. He said nothing, but his eyes, enormous and still, spoke to her more than any words. Bainer crouched down without invading his space and offered him a leaf and some colored pencils that he carried always in his briefcase. "If you want, draw something, anything," she said softly. Isaac looked at her by first time. He hesitated. Then he took the pencils and began to draw lines clumsy on the sheet. They were not houses or trees. It was a long stick, a raised hand, and a child bent over. Bainer felt a knot in his stomach. "Can I take me this?" he asked. Isaac nodded, barely with his head. To his side, Zorn had lying down, but not sleeping. He watched each inspector's movement as who evaluates whether she is an ally or a threat. And although she did not move her tail or made a single sound, Bainer knew that that dog there was understood everything. In that look, tired and protective, she found the confirmation she needed. Something very serious was happening over there. That night, Bainer wrote a report preliminary from the modest hostel room where he was staying in the people. They trembled lightly hands while writing. I had seen many forms of neglect and abuse, but Isaac's muteness, that way of being absent, being present, it weighed on him more than any visible blow. Attached, he drawing, described the attitude, the dog's defensiveness, the woman's indifference, and the general state of the environment. No evidence physical clear. I knew that the case could meet filed as a visit without irregularities, but it could not afford that. The next day returned to the farm without warning. This time I got a social worker and a veterinarian, claiming that I wanted also check the state of the animals, using her protocol as a shield for his true intention, to protect the child. While the adults they spoke at the entrance, Isaac watched from behind a pile of hay. I didn't know. Yeah, I had to hide or approach. Zorn was who decided by he, walking with a slow but steady pace decided towards Bainer and supporting his snout in his leg. She stroked it respectfully, like sensed that one gesture was a approval. The veterinarian, he examined Rocio carefully, noticing he wear in their joints the lack of horseshoes adequate and confirmed that the animal was being kept without attention, minimal. I could justify a complaint by abuse, he said in low voice. Bainer nodded. It was the thread that was needed to pull the whole skein. Meanwhile, the social worker got Isaac to sit with him some minutes. He didn't answer their questions, but took other pencil, this time drawing a house without windows, a bed without blankets, and a dog lying next to a child with bruises. The message was clear, brutal, and silent. The drawing was enough for Bainer to activate his protection protocol. Childish. It was not a decision easy. The law required more than intuitions and scribbles, but she there was learned that in many cases, the first there were no signs in the form of words, but of gestures, looks, or strokes trembling. That same later, he signed the request for Isaac to be transferred temporarily to a foster home while the situation was thoroughly investigated. When the car official returned to the farm with a paralegal, the woman he exploded. He shouted that this was an abuse, that the child was strange, and that no one in the people complained. But words were no longer enough. There was documents, initial testimonies, and an inspector who didn't think droppy case. Isaac was taken out with a small backpack that Zorn insisted on in a company, walking alongside the child as if it were yours, duty be there. No one argued, no one dared to stop the dog. Foster home wasn't perfect, but it was clean, warm, and quiet. Isaac didn't speak, nor did he. I was crying, but I was sleeping better. At night, Zorn went to bed in front of the door of his room and did not move until the sun appeared. In the following days, a psychologist started working with him, wearing games, paintings, and small stories. He didn't force anything, he let him space. And it was in one of those meetings when Isaac drew by first, once an open field. There were flowers, there was sun, and a boy standing next to a spotted dog. It was the first sign of something different. The psychologist showed I draw Bainer with a smile discreet. It is beginning to remember other and thing, he said. A part of it once imagined a place sure, And although still there was a long way to go, that little one change turned on a real hope. The trial for the custody of Isaac. It was not long before in schedule. The prosecutor's office there was gathered the drawings, the vet reports, the social worker records, and history of negligence on the farm. Although the defense claimed that the child invented things and that everything were misunderstandings, the judges were not left convinced. But what really marked a turning point was Zorn's presentation in the room. Boehner had required his presence not as witness, but as symbol. When Isaac saw it entering, his eyes filled with something other than fear. For the first time in weeks, he stood up alone, walked toward him and supported his hand on his loin. The court kept silence. No one could ignore the bond between that child and that dog-old man who, with a slow step, lay down at his feet like an Hidar. Stable. It was an act small, but he said more than many statements. The judges took his time to deliberate, but finally they decided that Isaac would not return to the farm. The state would assume your guardianship until you find a welcoming family definitive. Zorn, despite his age and your history, was accepted as part essential to the child's adaptation process. It is not a pet, it is a support emotional, Boehner explained, and no one questioned it. It was then when the idea arose to take Isaac to an equine therapy center. The psychologist there was noticed how he calmed down each time I remembered Rocio, the mare old. The center's team accepted, received them, and adapt the sessions to their rhythm. The first day, Isaac did not want to ride. He just sat down on the fence, looking at the horses. Zorn, like always, accompanied him, and so passed weeks in silence, watching, until one day, uninvited, Isaac approached a colt and touched it his snout. That moment, it was key. No one pressured him, no one celebrated him in voice high, but all he sent a team understood what it meant. Isaac had started to trust. From then on, his progress was small but consistent. He accepted riding a horse with help. He drew by first time without gray tones and began to tolerate closeness physics without shrinking. Every step was watched closely by Zorn, who did not go away more than 5 meters from its side. The dog, despite his age, it seemed rejuvenated. He didn't bark, neither I was running, but was always alert, as Yer understood that even had a mission to accomplish. The therapists began to include it in the sessions, using it as bridge emotional. Zorn gets on the horse first, do you want to tempt you afterwards? They proposed, and many times Isaac said yes, because if Zorn could do it, so could he. One autumn afternoon, when the air it smelled of dry leaves and the darling was covered in clouds, casualties, something unexpected, happened. One of the girls in the center, older than Isaac, tripped near the artificial lake on the property and fell into the water. The adults, they ran, but it was Zorn who reacted first. He jumped into the water with the agility that no one attributed to him. He swam up to her and, with a slight push of his body, kept her afloat until she was rescued. The act was recorded by a security camera and went viral in a matter of days. "Old dog, heroic soul," they said. The headlines. But for Isaac, it wasn't a novelty. It only confirmed what was already I knew. Zorn didn't need bark to protect. That one night, while caressing him, he back still wet. The child, he mumbled something, first time in weeks. "Thank you, Zorn." It was barely a whisper, but everyone heard it. Isaac had spoken again. If this moment touched you, subscribe to the channel. It's the only way we can continue telling stories like this. The center's team celebrated his little miracle, with a discretion respectful. Nobody wanted to scare to Isaac with applause or questions invasive. They let the moment float, settle in his memory as a triumph intimate. Since then, your voice began to appear little by little, like Yer had state saved in a box that was now carefully opened. He responded with monosyllables, then with phrases whole. Sometimes he would stop in the middle of a word like Yer had to negotiate his exit with the fear, but he spoke, and when he did, it Wasn't just with his mouth. His hands counted too. Stories. I drew scenes with more color, less shadows. There were no longer so many houses without windows. In their place, horses appeared, green fields, and always, always, a dog next to a child. Zorn was no longer just his guardian. It was his voice, his bridge, its shield. Do you feel something reading? This? Then maybe it's time to follow the page. This way you can help us continue. One day, Baina visited him again. He was wearing a file thick under the arm and the expression of relief that he barely concealed. He sat down with him in the center garden while Zorn rested at his feet. "Can I show you something?" he asked. Isaac nodded. Inside the folder there was a series of documents and an envelope with your name handwritten. "This is for you," Baina said. The boy carefully opened it. Inside was a letter from his biological mother, written shortly before she died, which had left forgotten in a drawer in the local courthouse. It read, "If I am ever not here, I want you to know that I loved more than anything, and the only thing that scares me is not being able to protect you. But you are strong, my love, so strong, and I hope that someone, someday, will see how valuable you are." Isaac didn't cry. He just hugged the leaf tightly and put it away. In his pocket, Zorn raised his head and looked at him in silence, like if I understood. Too, that find moved everyone in his center. The letter was a part more than help to reconstruct history Isaac's broken. Since then, the child began to ask more. I wanted to know how there was arrived at the center, by that lived with other people. What meant the documents that the adults exchanged? Their caregivers, they decided, speak to him truthfully, without embellishment, neither lies. They explained to him that he was in a place. Surely, there were people in charge of protecting him, and that he could soon have a family that truly loved him. Isaac listened in silence, but no longer afraid. The nights were less cold, since I could sleeping with Zorn at the foot of the bed, and the nightmares, although they did not disappear, became further short. Some days he would wake up agitated, but just seeing the dog there, breathing calm, he went back to sleep. It was like, his soul would have been accustomed to the heartbeat constant of that presence loyal. Meanwhile, in the town where all there was started, things were beginning to change. The trial against Isaac's stepmother was progressing more force of the expected. The complaint, Baina's initial, had opened others' doors. A neighbor who had heard screams, a former employee who had seen marks into the child's body, a veterinarian confirmed his state of abandonment of the animals. The network of silence that protected the farm is gone breaking. Fear gave way to shame and, little by little, to justice. At the final hearing, they presented the Isaac's drawings as evidence. Every stroke was projected in a screen. One showed a figure high with a whip, another a bed without sheets. But the one who most impact was he last, a child hugging a dog under a tree, with the phrase "Hear ye breath" written in letters clumsy. It was then when the judge interrupted his process for calling a recess. He needed a moment to compose himself. The judge, a woman with a stern face and years of experience, returned to the room with red eyes, but the voice firm. "What we just saw is not just a test, it's a cry for help sustained by too much time," he said. He dictated sentence forcefully. The stepmother would lose all rights to Isaac, would be open to investigation by omission of the biological father, and the property would be under surveillance by possible irregularities, labor, and animal abuse. It was a resolution historic for a case that many in the people preferred ignore. And by first, once again, Isaac wasn't invisible. He wasn't the child silent stable, but a survivor who had counted his history with colors, with silences, and with loyalty unconditional of a dog old man who did not leave never. Back at the Equine Therapy Center, Isaac's life slowly began to transform. He received family visits, interested parties in adopt it, but none, it seemed, fit in completely. Zorn was a natural filter. If the dog didn't come near, neither did I. Isaac, it was like, his instincts were aligned with the child's, until one late arrived a woman with hair short, firm hands and smile tired. Her name was Clara, and she worked as therapist occupational in a clinic pediatric. He did not do questions forced. He sat down in a grass next to Isaac and waited. He talked about the sun, the horses, his grandmother who made anise bread. And when Zorn came over and put his head in his lap, Isaac he said, "She does. Who can stay?" It was not necessary more. Clara understood that in that small gesture, the child had him open a door that no one further there was accomplished cross. And in his look, by first once, something like peace shone through. During the weeks next, Clara visited his center almost daily. He didn't bring gifts or promises, just presents. Sometimes they sat in silence to watching the horses, others drawing together in a notebook with thick sheets that she same there was brought. Isaac was no longer afraid the silences. There were learned that not everyone they hid danger. Clara spoke to him with the same naturalness with which he spoke to the staff of the center, without treating them like a broken child. I listened to him. I asked him, wanted to more juice. Yes, I preferred paint with red or blue. Whether Zorn slept with his head or paws on his belly. Those things small, repeated every day, they became on a real bridge. When the equipment decided that it was time to start a pre-adoption process, there was no doubts. Isaac said yes, Clara too. And Zorn, like always, he didn't have to say anything. He simply walked to the Clara's car and lay down in the shade, as if knew that I would be his new house. The adaptation was further simpler than everyone were afraid. Clara lived on the outskirts of the city, in a low house with a garden and many plants. There was a room empty waiting to be inhabited, and on the bed, a woven blanket with animal figures. Isaac entered without fear. He walked a place in silence, touched the walls, looked out the window. "Can I put my drawings here?" he asked, pointing at the wall above his desk. Clara smiled. "This room is yours, Isaac. You can do whatever you want." That night slept deeply by first time in a lot time. Zorn settled himself by the door as always, but at dawn they found him on the hallway carpet, snoring softly, like if there were also found his place. Nobody said it in voice high, but all they knew, something had happened, cured in that home. A wound old than now had coat, name and future. The first few months in the new house were full of discoveries. Isaac learned simple things with one intensity moving: to cut bread without fear, to light a lamp without startle, to close a door without thinking that someone would come behind. Every gesture was an achievement. Clara documented all with photographs subtle, without invasive. Sometimes he was surprised, crying in silence upon seeing Isaac lying down in the grass, scratching Zorn's ears while he hummed made-up words. There were difficult days too, nightmares, memories that appeared without warning, silent crises where he locked himself in, same. But Clara had learned to wait. He didn't correct, he didn't hurry. He only offered a hot tea, a blanket, and his proximity. Zorn also fulfilled his role. If Isaac cried, he came closer slowly and offered him his back as pillow. It was a choreography without rehearsals, an agreement tacit between three beings who knew what it was have been ignored. One day, Clara took him to the neighborhood park. There was children running, bicycles, ice creams melting in the sun. Isaac stayed still at first, watching. He didn't know that world, but something in the freedom of the place attracted him. He saw a group playing ball and approached with hesitant steps. He didn't ask enter, he just stayed close. One of the children looked at him and threw him his ball gently. Isaac caught it clumsily and returned it. So started. He played without speaking. He ran as if I had no weight, and for first time in his life, laughed in voice high. Clara, since the bank, took a hand to the mouth. I didn't want cry in front of him, but that laughter, free, without fear, without permission, was for her the greatest testimony that everything the previous pain had not passed been in vain. That one child who before only whispered, now filled the air with its happiness. After the park, Isaac was never the same again. Same. Something in its interior had been released. Like if that moment had happened to him, demonstrated that he had the right to occupy space, to do noise, to be a child. He began to speak more, to do questions, to propose games. I helped Clara in the kitchen. I told her stories. Invented and decorated his room with drawings new each week. Zorn followed him all sides, sometimes with a slower pace, sometimes going to bed before finishing his journey. Time also caught up with him, although no one dared to say it. Isaac seemed notice it. Some nights, in place of lying down first, he stayed sitting, caressing it. Like, yeah, I'd like make sure that your guardian was okay. Clara watched that relationship with a mixture of tenderness and respect. I knew that what they shared could not explain yourself. Just take care of yourself. One day, Isaac brought to school a drawing that surprised his teacher. It showed a field full of flowers, a yellow house with windows big, and a child riding a horse. "Who is it?" he asked her. "It's me, and that's Rocio," she replied with a smile, mild. It was the first time I mentioned his past with such clear words. The teacher, excited, saved his drawing as if it were a jewel. Then, during a writing activity, wrote a phrase that remained punch in the mural in the living room. Sometimes the heroes do not carry layer. Sometimes they have 4 legs, and they know when stay by your side. No one doubted who spoke. Zorn had converted in a figure recognized by all those who knew the story of Isaac. Even other people, his parents' children, greeted him at the school gate. And although he didn't respond, more than a slow blink was enough to understand, it was still in guard, like always. As time went by, and Isaac also began to interest by the animals in a different way. I asked by that some horses were further nervous than others, for that the dogs were lying down about his side left when sleeping, by that Zorn was no longer uploading stairs so fast. Clara, noticing his curiosity, he signed it up in a small animal care workshop in a center community. There, Isaac discovered that he could talk about Rocio without feeling pain, that I could share stories of his dog without fearing the compassion of others. In one of the activities, he wrote in a cardboard, "My dog is called Zorn. He was a rescuer and now he takes care of me, sometimes snores strong, but I don't mind because he saved me first." The instructor moved, hung up. The sign at the entrance to the center, the others' children. They began to see Zorn as a hero, silent, and Isaac, like someone who had much to teach. One weekend, the Equine Therapy Center organized a day open to the public. Families, therapists, and former members were invited, patients. Clara suggested that Isaac participate, giving a short chat about his experience. At first, they hesitated. It was too much for a child of their age. But he insisted. He prepared a cardboard with drawings and some phrases short. On the day of the event, he climbed into the small stage with Zorn at his side. He looked at the audience, breathed deep, and said, "I didn't talk, I just drew. But Zorn listened to me, and thanks to him, I began to trust again in people." Then he showed a drawing where appeared he, Zorn, and Clara in an open field with the word family written on it in his sky. There was silence, then applause. It wasn't just for what he was saying, but by everything he stood for. Isaac wasn't just a child recovered, it was a symbol that even wounds further slings they can heal. Yeah, someone decides to stay near he time enough. That night, after the event, Isaac went to bed early, but he didn't want to sleeping alone. He called Clara and asked her to sit down in his bed and stayed hugged Zorn by several minutes. "Do you think Zorn dreams?" he asked. Clara smiled. I think so. Maybe. Dream that still this rescuing people." Isaac looked at him sleeping, with its legs trembling gently as year ran in his world internal. "I want to dream as he," she whispered, and closed eyes. Clara gently covered him and left the room in tiptoe and stayed for a while in the room, in silence. I felt that something sacred was passing there, not by religiosity, but for the real feeling that a child there was reborn without anyone noticing, in voice high. Isaac, That child who before did not raise his gaze was now the master of his words, of his history and its future. But the time does not stop, and neither does it he body. Zorn began to show signs further clear of tiredness. I slept more, and ate less, and no longer accompanied Isaac everywhere. The vet, he said it was normal that his heart was exhausted, who had given more than any dog ought give in a life. Isaac heard him in silence, with the jaw tight. That night, he didn't draw, he didn't speak. He just lay next to Zorn in the floor of the living room and put his head on his chest. "Don't you go still," she said, without tears. "Still, I have things to show." Clara stayed close, without intervening. I knew that Bond did not belong to him, that the only thing that could to do was to hold his space, ensure that the latter stretch were full of love, warm bread, caresses soft and certain absolute, that Zorn, although old and tired, he continued being a guardian of that child reborn. Quiet days passed, but loaded with a tenderness different. Like all in the house, they knew that each gesture was an early farewell. Isaac became Zorn's caretaker. He prepared him his food with care, moistened him his snout with a little spoon. I read to him tales in the ear, even if I didn't know if I understood. They slept together in a pad improvised in a child's room. Every night, Isaac wrote down in a notebook what he called Zorn's adventures. Stories invented about missions impossible than the dog he solved with intelligence and courage. "Today he saved a tortoise trapped in a bucket," he wrote, and then went to the moon to search a star that had been fallen to a sad child. Clara read those pages with the heart in the throat. I knew Isaac was building his farewell with words, transforming the pain in memory, in myth, into something that could hold when he empty will arrive. One Sunday morning, the sun was coming in warm through the bedroom window. Isaac woke up earlier than usual. He turned to pet Zorn, but something in his silence stopped him. The dog was lying on his side, with his head relaxed and his eyes closed. He wasn't breathing. Isaac didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just stayed there, watching, like, I would have already done it, understood before opening eyes. Then he stood up, looked his notebook and wrote in handwriting trembling, "Today, Zorn went to his last mission. He went to look for Mum, to tell her that he was already, I'm fine." When Clara found him, she hugged him without saying a word. They spent the morning in silence, hugging on the carpet next to the body of the one who had been his guardian, his family, his voice. Sadness had no screams, it only had weight. But even that weight, Isaac seemed know it carry with the dignity of one who already there was survived too many goodbyes. The burial was simple, in a garden back of the house, under a tree where Zorn used to lie down in the afternoons. Isaac chose his place exactly. He helped dig with a shovel little girl, got her hands dirty without protest. Then she put a blanket over the dog's body and left it next to him, his first drawing. That one in the one that appeared the three, him, Clara and Zorn under one sky blue. Clara read in low voice a fragment of Isaac's notebook, chosen by his same. "Heroes leave when already they fulfilled his mission. Zorn came to save me, and now will take care to others from heaven." There was no neighbors, nor ceremonies, just the two of them, one wooden box, and a tree that was beginning to bloom before spring. Isaac stayed over there sitting for hours, like each second would help leave something in order within himself. When evening fell, he stood up, washed his hands and said to Clara, "Let's go home. You already know the path." In the following days, the house was filled with silence different. It was no longer the same silence of fear nor of abandonment, but that which appears after having beloved a lot. Isaac went back to sleep in his bed, although took time in reconciling the dream. Some nights he got up, he sat down in front of the window and talked to himself. He told Zorn how there was been your day, what there was learned at school, what colors there was used in his last drawing. Sometimes he laughed. Clara watched him from the door and felt that his son, because I already called him so, without reservations, he was not alone although nobody further could see him. When he arrived, the day Isaac asked, "Adopt other dog," Clara hugged him for a long time before answering, "Yes, but not to replace Zorn, to continue sharing love," he said, with a maturity that broke the soul. And so they did. They chose together with the new partner. It was not easy. Isaac wanted a dog quiet but not old. Zorn was unique, he repeated. This may be different. They visited shelters, spoke with caregivers, observed dozens of animals until they met one, a mixed breed of size medium, hair, tangled and sweet look, to which no one, it seemed, lent attention. His name was Bruno. I didn't know sit down on command, nor he walked straight on the leash, but when saw to Isaac, wagged his tail and leaned his front against his leg. It was enough. That same afternoon, they returned home 3. Bruno was clumsy. He ate too much fast and had fear of the thunder. But Isaac watched over him with a patience impressive. "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to stay," he said. And Bruno stayed. Never tried to occupy his Zorn's place, but found his space, the corner of the living room, the rug next to the stove, the corner right of the bed. With the time, Isaac was growing up. His story became known in the region, not by morbid, but as example of overcoming. He was invited to give talks in schools, reception centers, and events educational. Always I went with Clara and Bruno. Never. He spoke of pain without also speaking of hope. He carried with him a folder with drawings that they were made in different moments of your life. One of them in particular moved everyone. A child with his back turned, with a backpack, walking hand in hand with a dog, and a sky full of heart-shaped clouds. "Not all the guardians, they have to stay forever," he said. "In their presentations, some just come to show us that we can be brave alone." His voice, confident and warm, was that of someone who had learned to name things. Sometimes it broke, sometimes toward a long pause, but he was no longer silent. Isaac had recovered his voice, and now he used it to help to others to find yours. To the 12 years, Isaac wrote a story illustrated that titled The Invisible Guardian. It was a history simple, but full of soul. It narrated the life of a child who could not talk because his words had been hiding from fear, and like a dog silent, old and lame, he had helped to find them. Other time, Clara helped him register the story and to send it to a small provincial literary competition. They didn't expect win, but the jury, moved for the honesty and strength of the story, he awarded it first place. The story was published in a booklet that was distributed by all schools public in the region. Isaac did not celebrate with jumps, no screams. He only placed one copy in a shelf next to his notebook of the adventures of Zorn and muttered, "Now others' children are going to meet him." For him, it was a way to keep the memory of his dog, not as a perfect hero, but as the friend who stayed when nobody more did it. The impact of the story was bigger than they imagined. A local foundation, which worked with children victims of trauma, contacted Clara to propose a program pilot based in the story of Isaac. They wanted to use his tale as support material in therapies, and they asked his permission to include your drawings in the sessions. Isaac humbly accepted. If it helps to someone, of course. He participated in some workshops, read fragments in voice high. He replied questions. Some children told him their own stories, secrets in low voice after activities. To all I listened with respect, like if his words were stones delicate. Never he would interrupt. He would just nod, and sometimes he would draw something for them. "Being afraid isn't bad," he would tell them. "What's bad is being alone with it." So, without seeking it, Isaac became in a kind of lighthouse, not because had all the answers, but because there was learned to walk in the dark and come back with a flashlight. The relationship with Bruno was also growing in depth, although different from the one he had with Zorn. Bruno was playful, messy, and outrageously affectionate. He liked steel socks, break flower pots, and chase butterflies in a garden. Isaac adored it by that same. With him, there was no sad memories, nor shadows of the past. It was his present, his laughter daily. One day, while they played with a ball in the park, a child, further little one, fell close and began to cry disconsolately. Bruno came over and stood still to his side, supporting his snout in his knee. The child stopped crying. Isaac watched in silence and then said to Clara, "He knows it too. He knows when someone needs company." Clara didn't respond. She just looked at him with the certainty that her son there was inherited something, invisible from Zorn, not his form nor his age, but his mission, to be attentive to others without demanding anything in return. One Saturday in the afternoon, while organized old boxes in the attic, Clara found a photo worn out of the Isaac's first days in the equine therapy center. In it, the child he was standing with his back to Zorn, sitting in front of a colt. He showed it to her, to Isaac, who watched her in silence. Then, with voice calmly, she said, "That was the day when I still didn't know if it was possible trust." And he stayed, just that, stay. He saved the photo in a frame, small, and put it on his desk, so as not to forget who taught me to look without fear. That night, he wrote in his notebook a phrase new: "Zorn didn't die. He became part of everything I am. When I help, when I listen, when I stay, it is." Clara, upon reading it further. Lately, he couldn't avoid cry, not from sadness, but from gratitude, because I understood that that one dog there was Bran a lot more than a child. There was Bran a whole story. With the years, Isaac began to interest for psychology. He said he wanted to understand by that some adults forgot to take care of, and therefore that the children they kept so much in silence. Clara supported him in every step. He accompanied him to talks, helped him to study. He paid attention books and listened. To him, talk for hours on end, he behavior human. Bruno, already further old man, he threw himself at his feet while he read, as Zorn had done made years back. In one of his editorials as a school teacher, Isaac wrote, "I don't want to be someone who saves. I want to be someone who stays, like Zorn, like Clara, like those who don't ask, they just accompany." His teacher shared that text with others colleagues and soon reached the hands of a director who proposed to include it in a training manual for educators. Isaac, at 15 years old, became in source of teaching not by theories, but by experience lived. At an educational fair, it was invited to give a chat with others teenagers who had overcome adversities. Clara was among the audience, with Bruno lying under the chair. Isaac came on stage without papers, just with his words. He told his story without drama, with pauses long, with the serenity of someone no longer afraid. Remember, I learned that the silence, it can be a cage or a way to resist until it arrives someone who listens. Not everyone we are lucky to find a Zorn, but yes, we can be one for someone more. When finished, the audience stood up. Clara didn't applaud. She just looked at him with shining eyes. She knew that that child who one day arrived broken, afraid even of his own shadow, now was teaching to others to see life with compassion. And that, in some way, Zorn was also there. In every word, in every pause, in every act of presence. After that chat, letters began to arrive. Children, parents, educators. Some just said, "Thank you." Others, they counted stories difficult, with open endings, but full of hope. Isaac replied, each one with dedication, never gave advice. "I was just sharing what I had learned, that pain needs time. There is no shame in have fear, and that sometimes, the most, it is important not to let go of the hand that is shaking." Bruno accompanied him in that ritual. He threw himself at her side while I wrote, and sometimes supported his snout on his legs as knew that those words were also an act of healing. Clara was preparing tea, lit a soft lamp, and let the house be filled with that calm, silent, that had so much to them side build. Each card was a seed, and although not all gave fruit immediately, Isaac knew that something remained sown in who felt heard. One afternoon, Rainy received an envelope with no Return address. Inside was a drawing, a child sitting in the rain with a dog old to his side. Just that, not a word. Isaac looked at him for a long time and then hit him on the wall next to his desk. "That was me, he said. "And he's also someone who's now same waiting for the storm to pass. He didn't try figure out who had it sent. He did not do missing. I knew that in some place someone there was understood. That," Knight wrote in his notebook, "when a memory touch without breaking, you know it has healed." Then he hugged Bruno, who was already, he snored, wrapped in a blanket, and stayed asleep with a deep peace, one of those that do not make noise, but leave footprint. Clara, passing by his room and see it so, he felt that everything had sense, not because the pain would have disappeared, but because there was been transformed, like who turns a bark in an embrace, a wound in history, and a silence in home. To the 17, Isaac began to collaborate as volunteer in the same equine therapy center where there was started his renaissance. At first, they regarded him with caution, not because they would doubt him, but because it was difficult for them to believe that one young man with a smile, calmed down outside same child who arrived in complete silence years back. But it was enough nails weeks for everyone understood. Isaac had a gift. He was not charismatic neither, energetic, but his mere presence generated trust. I knew when be silent, when approach, when sit next to a child, and simply to be. The animals noticed it too. Some restless horses calmed down when he entered in the corral. The mothers were crying in silence upon seeing him work, without knowing exactly why what. Maybe because in his gestures there was living proof that healing was possible, even when all it seemed lost. Isaac didn't do it by merit, but by gratitude. It was in that center where met Julia, a young veterinary student who was doing practices with the animals. She didn't know his story at first, and he liked that to Isaac. They talked first about horses, then about dogs, then about books. They went weeks before he mentioned Zorn, and when he did, it was not with sadness, but with the kind of tenderness reserved for the irreplaceable. Julia listened attentively, without interrupting. When he finished, he simply said, "I would have liked to know him." Since then, they started sharing further time. I don't eat who they are looking for something, but as who enjoy what they already have is. Isaac felt something new, the possibility of opening up without fear, of letting someone know him, without needing to protect himself. It was another form of healing, one that didn't erase what he'd experienced, but that taught him that love could also be born in calm, without surprises, without goodbyes. With Julia, things they moved forward without haste. Sometimes were studying together, others simply they were walking by the field, with Bruno walking to his rhythm behind. Isaac didn't feel the urgency to tell him everything, nor the anxiety of being understood by force. With it, the silence was comfortable again. One day, while they were walking by the lake, Julia asked him, still had fear? Isaac thought some seconds before answering. Sometimes yes, but now I'm not left alone with him. She looked at him softly, as if, that response would confirm that there was further courage in that which in any heroic story. When Isaac got home, he found Clara reading in a porch and told him about his walk. "Do you think Dad would be, are you proud?" he asked suddenly. Clara looked at him affectionately, but with the firmness that she always used when the truth was important. "I don't know, but I know your mother would be, and so am I." That same 1 year, Isaac finished high school with honors. At the graduation ceremony, Clara and Bruno were in front row. When they said his name, the audience applauded further stronger than with the others, not for favoritism, but because many they knew his history. Some teachers were crying. Isaac went up on stage, received his diploma, and looking at the audience, he raised it about as if it were an invisible trophy. It didn't give speech. He just came down, bent down and hugged Bruno in front of everyone. It was his way of saying that that there would be been possible without him. Later, at home, they celebrated with a dinner simple. Clara prepared carrot cake, like in the birthday. Isaac hung up his diploma in the hallway, right next to a photo framed by Zorn. "So you know we did it," he said, and at that moment everyone they knew, without saying it, that child, the one from the stable, had arrived a lot further far from whatever imagined. Isaac started college with a mixture of enthusiasm and nerves. There was elected psychology, as it had been dreamed from child. The first days were hard, the noise, the crowds, the speed of the classes, but it didn't take long in adapt. He was wearing with him a notebook where continued drawing. Sometimes were faces, others times landscapes, and many, sometimes even, Zorn's silhouette watching from some corner. Bruno, now further old and with the snout white, I was expecting it at home every late. Sometimes it was hard for him get a B, but his look continued being the same, warm, attentive, non-judgmental. Isaac spoke to him as who catches up with a friend. "Today we talk about Link's insurance," he said. "And I thought in you." Clara observed those conversations from the kitchen with the heart tight. I knew that life I was moving forward, but I also knew that some presences are not measured in years, but in roots. During a class on childhood trauma, the professor proposed an exercise: share, if they felt comfortable, some personal experience that they had motivated to study psychology. There was a long silence. Then a girl speak about his brother with autism. Other young told about the death of his mother. When it came to him, he shift to Isaac, he breathed deep. "I happens a lot time without speaking, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't know. Yeah, someone wanted to listen. A dog old man taught me that sometimes it doesn't do lack say nothing to be. And since so, I tried to be that for others, someone who stays." There was no applause, just a deep and respectful silence. At the end of the class, several colleagues approached him. Some just shook his hand. Others told him their own stories in low voice. And in that exchange, Isaac understood something that was nunt in none book. Healing isn't always about forgetting. Sometimes healing is about sharing the wound without fear. That same one. At night, when Isaac returned home, he found Bruno lying next to the armchair, breathing heavily. He knelt down beside him, sighed, caressed it in silence, and said to him, Don't worry, friend, I'm fine." Bruno looked at him with wet eyes and closed his eyes. The eyelids slowly, like, yeah, that phrase was the signal I needed. That morning, he left, without pain, without noise, like a guardian who, seeing that his mission has been fulfilled, can rest. Isaac didn't cry right away. He covered him with the blue and blanket, placed his toy favorite, and called Clara. Together, they buried him next to Zorn, under the same tree, like his circle was completed. Isaac spent days in silence, but it was not the same silence from before. It wasn't a refuge, it was a tribute, a space of respect for whoever had accompanied in a second stage of his life, more bright, but no less important. When he returned to college, he took with him a new notebook. In the first page wrote, "Bruno was the joy, Zorn, the lifeguard, and I, proof that even the broken ones can flourish." He began to develop a project with his teachers to create a program therapeutic that would integrate animals rescued in accompaniment processes. Childish. I wanted close. He cycled, transforming his experience into something useful, replicable, healing. He visited shelters, talked to veterinarians, interviewed therapists. Clara helped him with the legal side, and Julia, who followed her side, firm, designed the protocols. Veterinarians, they called it Project Guardian, in honor of those who don't leave when all it hurts. In the presentation official, Isaac closed his speech with a phrase simple, looking at the audience with the same calm as always. "This is not a tribute to the dogs. It is a tribute to the silent love that we save when nobody further can." And among the attendees, many they cried, not for pity, but because understood. Everyone, in some moment, they had needed a Guardian. Guardian project grew up further faster than expected. In less than a year, collaborated with 3 centers, community, and a municipal shelter. Isaac divided his time between classes, coordination meetings, and visits to the children who participated in the program. I did not need prove anything. He just sat next to. They offered them a pencil or a pet, the dog that accompanied, and waited. Some spoke, others didn't, but all, without exception, began to change. The volunteers. They said that the dogs they knew that do before them. It's like felt where there is sadness, he murmured. Educator. Isaac nodded. I knew they weren't just animals. They were bridges. And each time a child dared to hug someone or whisper something in their ear, I felt that Zorn and Bruno's mission was still alive. Not in but in that invisible chain of affection that crossed generations. One afternoon, in a radio interview, they asked him that would change from his childhood. Could. Isaac kept silence some seconds before answering. Nothing, he said, because even the most, it took me hard to find everything I have today. Change a part, I would risk everything else. The journalist, he insisted, wouldn't you trade your mother's absence? The pain, the blows. Isaac breathed deep. Of course there would be. Darling, avoid the pain. But if there weren't known the darkness, such time never there would be valued the light, and there would be no met Zorn. And without Zorn, I wouldn't be here. The driver was speechless for a moment. Then he thanked us and closed the door. He programmed with a tone different. In the following days, the interview went viral. People from all over wrote, shared memories of their own guardians, dogs, grandparents, teachers, even unknown people who had left fair when further than needed. Isaac didn't answer at all, but saved each history. I knew that there was something important, something universal. With the time, the Guardian Project began to receive recognition institutional. A university in the north of the country offered support to expand it. A foundation international donated resources to open a space physicist, and several therapists they asked training based in his methodology. Isaac, although grateful, he maintained feet on the ground. He rejected proposals they wanted convert his history in campaign advertising. I am not a symbol, he repeated. I am a person who was cared for in silence, and now I just want return that care. Clara, who continued supporting him in everything, he looked at it with pride each time he said those things. At meetings, she was the one who kept the papers important, who leaked proposals, who remembered him to eat when he was lost in work. I am still your guardian, he told her in joke. And he replied, you are, but now I am also the guardian of others. And in that balanced silence, it was being built a life that did not erase his past, but embraced it with dignity. One day, while organized a day with children newly arrived at the program, a voluntary young man approached him with eyes full of tears. My brother is like I, but never we knew as help him. Today, for first once, I saw him laugh with one of the dogs. You don't know what that means. Isaac didn't respond with words. He just handed her a handkerchief and sat down next to her. She, like there was learned to do from child, because sometimes the answer wasn't a phrase pretty, but a presence that does not move. Later, in his notebook, wrote, never we will know how many lives we play, simply staying. That phrase became part of the central mural of the Center Guardian, written in letters big about an image in Zorn's black and white. And everyone, those who arrived, read it upon entering. Some did not understand immediately, but with the time, everyone, without exception, knew what it meant stay and what could change. If you got this far, prove it was worth it. It's a shame. Subscribe, comment, or share this video. It really helps us keep going. When Isaac turned 21 years, organized a celebration in his center with children, volunteers, therapists, and families. It was not a traditional party. There was no cake with candles, neither music high. It was more of an encounter full of gratitude. Every person who had passed by, he programmed, brought a letter, a drawing, or a small history about what it meant to have a guardian. Isaac heard all with attention, hugged each one, and smiled more than usual. At the end of the day, he sat down in a garden with Clara and Julia, while the last rays of the sun touched the walls of the building. "Sometimes I wonder as I would be all if Zorn hadn't stayed," he said in low voice. Clara took his hand. "We won't know. But yes, we know that past because was there." Julia, without saying anything, kissed him on the forehead, and in that silence shared, Isaac felt that life, with everything it had taken away, he had also given something immense. That night, while reviewing the letters that had been sent to him, delivered, found one that didn't have name. Inside, there was a single sentence: "You were my guardian, even though you didn't know it." He didn't know who wrote it, but kept it with special care. He placed it in his notebook right next to the letter from his biological mother and a photo of Zorn sleeping. At those heights, Isaac no longer needed answers for everything. There were learned to accept the mysteries with gratitude. I knew that the real impact is not always seen, that many sometimes it is sown without noticing, and that the most valuable usually grow in silence. Closed a notebook, stroked one of the dogs further new to the program. A puppy nervous too, the one who just were training, and said to him tenderly, "Calm down, little one. Here nobody has to be strong all he time." Because if there was something understood on that path, it was that even he further brave needs, from time to time in when, a place where rest. With the years, Isaac became a reference for many. Invited to conferences, cited in articles academics, nominated for awards that never imagined, but never. He let that take him away from his purpose. He continued going downtown every week. He continued sitting with the children, continued caressing each one dog with the same delicacy than when he was one of them. Sometimes, the new volunteers looked at him with admiration, without knowing exactly what made it so special. Clara used to say, "Isaac does not speak from he knowledge, speech from the wound healed." That difference was everything. I didn't use technicalities, did not give chairs. I was just there, as Zorn was, as Bruno was, as Clara was. It was the chain of presence that held everything, and he knew it. That's why every time someone said thank you to him, he responded always the same. "Thank you, I leave you a company." One winter morning, while ordered boxes old in he center depot, found the blue blanket with which they had wrapped Zorn. It was folded, clean, with the smell of time, but intact. He held her in the hands by several minutes, without moving. He didn't cry, and he didn't do noise. He just took her. I get the little one corner where still kept his things personal. He placed her on a shelf and left it a note on top. "Always you were, and still you are." That afternoon, during a session group with teenagers who had just entered the program, one of them, with a voice trembling, she asked if it was really possible stop feeling fear all he time. Isaac bowed toward. He said calmly, "It's not about not having fear. It's about learning that, even if you feel it, you are not alone." The boy looked at him fixed, and by first time he smiled. From that day on, he never further missed one session, and in each one sat next to Isaac. That teenager, named Samuel, gradually became a new version of Isaac that sometime was. At first he spoke little. He avoided eye contact and walked as who expect a blow in each corner. But with the time, and about everything with him accompanying, a dog, don't worry, called Cloud, began to change. Cloud was white, with a look shy and slow movements. They seemed facts one for the one another. Samuel told him things he didn't say, in voice, tall. I slept with her in the rest corner of the center and eventually began to talk to the people as well others. Isaac watched him carefully, without pressure. He taught him to take care of Cloud, to read his signals, to be patient. "Dogs don't, they ask us to be happy," he told her, "just that we are there." One day, Samuel gave him a drawing, a child hugging a bitch under a huge moon. Below, written in letters insecure, "Thank you for stay." Isaac posted that drawing in his office, next to a series of others that there were gone, accumulating over the years. Each one counted a history. None were perfect, but all were true. In a meeting with the team, proposed open a gallery permanent with those works, the gallery of those who healed. It would not be a museum, it would be a living space, where each visitor could see that the recovery was not a straight line, but possible. Once the idea is approved, the equipment job during weeks to assemble his space. The inauguration was intimate. There was no speeches, just one hike slow by the hallways decorated with drawings, letters, phrases, and objects significant. At the end of the tour, a wooden plaque. He said, "Here the memory of those who learned to trust lives. Their other time." Clara, reading it, took Isaac's hand and murmured, "You did it." And he, with moist eyes, replied, "We did it, all of us who stayed. This channel lives thanks to you. If you haven't already, you have done. Subscribe. It allows us to continue sharing stories that heal. With the passing of the years, the Guardian Project network expanded to other regions. New centers were adapting her model, always respecting his essence: bond, silence, permanence. Isaac traveled frequently to train teams, visit new spaces, and share his experience. But never I stopped returning to the first center, which I considered his home. There continued his room, your desk, and the tree under it which Zorn and Bruno were resting. Every time he returned, he would pass by that corner first. He would sit compared to simple tombstones, without dates, without decorations, only with the names hand carved. And he spoke. Sometimes only a few minutes. Sometimes he stayed for hours. "Today, we helped to other girl," he told them. "Today, one of the dogs retired." It wasn't superstition. It was ritual, an act of respect to those who had been the pillars of its life, because Isaac knew that gratitude is also cultivated in silence. One day, while I was walking by the patio with Julia, she asked him, "Thought write a book." "Everyone wants to know your story," he told him. Isaac smiled. "My story already this written, in each child who speaks again, in each dog that lies down without fear, in each volunteer who learns to stay." But that night, while looked at his notebooks ancient, thought that such time, it was worth it, leave something else organized, not by fame, but so that, when he were no longer there, others knew as began everything. So began to write, calmly, without pretensions. Not an autobiography, but a guide to tenderness, a learning log, a testimony about as the links honest they can. Change destinations. He called it Manual for Staying. Clara was the first in read it, and when he finished, with his eyes full, he said, "This is not a manual, it is a heritage." Isaac smiled. He knew there was no greater legacy than teaching to others, not to let go of the hand. The Manual to Stay was published independently, without major campaigns, neither appearances media. Even so, it spread quickly among educators, psychologists, workers, social and families. It was a book simple, full of anecdotes, drawings, short phrases and reflections, written with humility. No promises solutions miraculous, but offered company. On the networks, fragments began to circulate. Staying is not stopping, it is deciding a company without conditions. Not always you will know that say, but you are there, that's enough. Isaac received messages from people all over he world that thanked him to have them put words to something they felt, but they didn't know. Express. He responded with the usual, "Thank you for stay." And although his name, it started to sound louder, it didn't change his routine. He followed getting up early, watering a garden, caressing the dogs, sitting with each child who arrived at the center with fear in the eyes. Because his history was not a title, it was a practice daily. One afternoon, while we're preparing a new litter of puppies for their first contact with the children, Samuel, the teenager, what years back, there was arrived broken, came closer to Isaac with a proposal. "I want study psychology, like you." Isaac looked at him with a mixture of pride and emotion. He didn't say much, He just hugged him and replied, "Then I will stay to help you." She was one of the few times in which it was a loud cry in front of the others, because at that moment understood that the cycle was renewed. That's how it is, as Zorn stayed by now he stayed by Samuel, and that one day Samuel would stay by another. It was a chain silent but firm, like the roots of a tree that no one go, but they hold everything that blooms up. That night, Isaac wrote the last Your Page notebook, what began with a dog and a boy in a stable. Today, it is an entire forest that continues growing. The forest he was talking about was not just a metaphor. In the part rear of the center, there were started planting trees by each child passing by his program. It was Julia's idea and Isaac loved it. Each tree had a small plaque with a name and a chosen word by his own child. Trust, courage, hug, hope. With the time, that land arid was transformed. In a place green, full of life, the birds nested, the dogs they ran among the roots, young people, and families they returned over there even years afterwards, just to sit in the shade. Isaac walked through that forest with respect, sometimes found to some child, hugged his tree, others times found drawings hanging from the branches. "This place heals," he said, and everyone they knew it was true. Not because magic, but because each tree had been sown in a moment of rebirth. It was a forest made of second-hand opportunities. One day, while they planted a new tree for a little girl called April, who had arrived after losing his mother in an accident, Isaac stopped to notice as she placed the plate with trembling hands. When she finished, she looked at him and asked, "Do you think she sees me from there up?" Isaac bent down, looked her in the eye and replied, "Yes, and you should be very proud of you." Then, without adding moreover, he offered her a drawing of a little girl and her mother together under a flowering tree. She hugged him in silence. It was one of those moments in those that Isaac understood by that continued there. It wasn't just about helping, it was about reminding them, over and over again, time, that although life can break us, it can also to come together again. Like the trees that bend with the wind, but continue standing. Like the children who speak again. Like the guardians who never really left. The forest grew so much that with the time became in part essential part of the program. It was the closing symbolic of each process. When a child ended his cycle, planted his tree, left his word and said goodbye knowing that something of his was left there, growing. Some they returned years later with his own families to show the tree they had planted. Others they sent letters or photos. Isaac kept them, all of them. I had a box with hundreds of notes, drawings and words written in calligraphy trembling. Sometimes I reread them alone, in silence, and felt that everything, it was worth it. Not because recognition, but for knowing that there was contributed to something else bigger than him same. Clara said it better than anyone. You didn't just plant trees, Isaac. You planted dignity, memory, and love. And he who had learned to speak from the wound, he smiled humbly, because I knew I had reason, and that even if I couldn't measure it, there was changed destinations. In a special ceremony at 15 years old, Isaac was surprised with a tribute. They had built a stone bench in the heart of the forest, with a registration simple, "To those who stayed when further it hurt." Beside it, a life-size sculpture by Zorn made in bronze. Isaac didn't know it, and when he saw it, he was amazed, motionless. He walked towards the figure. He caressed his metallic head and whispered, "You're back." Everyone kept silence. It was one of those moments in which no one needs to speak. Clara was there, with his eyes full. Julia too. Samuel, already university student, recorded he moment with tears discreet. Isaac sat down in the bank, closed eyes, and took a deep breath. Everything was in his place. The boy who once survived in a stable now, he rested under trees that never stopped growing, and he understood, though he body, which is sometimes not needed, do noise to leave fingerprint. That night, after the ceremony, Isaac returned to the forest when already everyone had gone. The moon illuminated the trees, young people, the plates shone with a soft glow, and the wind moved the leaves like, yeah, they will whisper stories. He sat down again in the bench, next to the Zorn sculpture, and took out his notebook. He wrote, "Today I understood that we were not rescued. We found each other." He looked up at the sky, unhurried. He asked for nothing. He didn't wait signs. He just breathed. He felt a peace so real it hurt a little, as if all the pain of his childhood would have found at last a place where rest. When he got up, he placed about the sculpture a flower wild that April had picked up hours before. Then he walked slowly toward the exit of the forest. He didn't look back. He knew that the important thing was not in look, but in continue sowing, and in trust that each step of his was also a seed. The following days were calmed down, but different. Isaac noticed that he no longer felt that impulse, constant of doing, of solving, of saving. Now could simply to be. He helped with what was needed, guided the new volunteers, and it was allowed pauses that he had previously denied. There were understood that staying was also knowing how to let go when his cycle is completed. Samuel took further responsibilities, Julia led some workshops, and the equipment, it worked like a living organism. Clara, already grown up, would say to him, "Now he's center, it's no longer up to you. And that's the most beautiful that you achieved." Isaac knew it. That's why, when a foundation of another country proposed to him replicate he modeled there, he did not hesitate. He accepted to go but not to stay, only to sow, because his true legacy is not who stays forever, but who teaches them to stay. And that, Isaac understood, was what Zorn had told him, shown from the first day, with his snout still and his eyes faithful. The first time he stepped on the new country, with the notebook under the arm and a light backpack, Isaac felt that vertigo ancient that only they know who they have learned to survive. But this maybe he didn't come fleeing. He was coming to offer. They received him warmly, although many did not know at all who he was. To them, he was just a young man who brought an idea, and that it was enough. For weeks, he knew children, visited shelters, talked to therapists. He listened more than he spoke. He observed more than proposed. And when believed that there was found, he placed right to plant the first tree. He did it without ceremony. It only took a shovel, a seed, and wrote on the plaque, "Here you can also return to start." The center staff looked at him in silence. They understood that it was not a symbol, but a promise. And little by little, the same process that had born in a corner forgotten in the Spanish countryside began to bloom thousands of miles from home. During his stay, Isaac sent letters to Clara, Julia, and Samuel. He told them with emotion the small advances, the faces new, the dogs adopted, the first words of some children. In one of those letters he wrote, "Sometimes I wonder if Zorn would have resisted this journey, but then I think that he already, this here, in each child who looks back without fear." Julia responded with a photo of Bruno, printed and framed, for him to take with him. Clara sent him a scarf hand, woven, and Samuel, a drawing made by one of the new children from the center, a tree and a dog sleeping in his shadow. Isaac hung up that image in the temporary office that they had assigned. "I saw her every day when you come and go, not as a memory, but as a compass, because I understood that while had a single story that was worth hearing, the road would not end. It would just continue, changing landscape." The day he returned to Spain, several children said goodbye with hugs and drawings. Some gave him letters, others small stones painted with words like strength, love, and trust. Isaac kept each one carefully. It didn't feel hero, neither guide. It felt part, a thread further in that silent network of affection that had learned to knit from child. When he got home, Clara was waiting for him, in his platform with a smile tired and the arms open. Julia hugged him from behind, and Samuel greeted him with the respect of whom recognizes the teacher, but also the friend. Walking by his forest path, noticed that the trees were higher, the plates further worn, but all was still alive. He sat down in his bench next to the Zorn sculpture and left on its bronze legs a stone graffiti that was there brought in a pocket. He said simply, "Thank you." Days later, in a session with a new group, a little girl small raised his hand and asked if it was true that the dogs they understood when someone was sad. Isaac bent down, looked her in the eyes and replied, "They don't just get it, they stay, even though you don't say anything." The girl nodded as, "Yeah, I already knew it." At that moment, a mixed-breed puppy lay down on his side and rested his head on his legs. Isaac smiled. Everything was in his place. That night wrote, "Sometimes I think that the guardians, they never go away. They just transform. In other eyes, other steps, other silences that know when stay." And he understood, without needing confirmation, that his history, the story of Isaac, Zorn, Bruno, Clara, Julia, Samuel, and so many others, was not about save. It was about accompany, about remain, about stay when further it hurts. Because in that gesture, simple and profound, true dreams are born transformations. The manual to stay was translated into several languages, and the Guardian Project replicated in more than 12 countries. But Isaac continued seeing each history as unique, never left carried by the numbers, nor by statistics, neither by the recognitions. For him, the true impact was seeing a child draw a house with windows, a dog sleep without disturbances, or a volunteer stay sitting. Without looking, he clocked. Those were his victories. One day, a journalist asked him which considered that there was been his greatest achievement. Isaac thought for a long time before answering. "That a child as I don't know left alone." That was his sentence. Simple, direct, and sufficient, because yes, someone as he who had learned to be silent, to shrink, to survive, there was found a place sure, then everything else it was worth it. It didn't matter how many awards or mentions received. What mattered was that others found it too. And so, as time went on, Isaac was letting the equipment grew up without his constant presence. I knew that the cycles do not close when they turn off, but when bloom in others. Clara, already retreat, visited a center of time and when with his cane and his serene look. Julia continued leading her area veterinarian, and Samuel, recently graduated, directed his first group of teenagers. Isaac watched him proudly, without intervening. One day he sat at the back of the room, just listening, and when Samuel said, "We're not going here to demand that you speak, just that you are," Isaac felt that everything was in peace. May the seed there was lying roots, that the guardians, those who once protected him without words, now lived in each that boy's gesture. It was time to move on sowing, but also releasing, because even those who teach to stay also deserve rest. Isaac decided get away from the center for a while, not because tiredness, but because felt that his presence constant was no longer needed. He moved to a simple house near the forest, where could see the cups of the trees from his window. He continued writing, receiving letters, and from time to time, in Wenda, appeared by surprise in some sit-down session only to listen. He was wearing I get a wooden cane that I had carved a child as gratitude. On the handle was recorded one word, stay. Every morning was walking by he forest path, greeted the trees, read the plaques, and stopped in front of Zorn's sculpture. Never spoke in voice high. He only stayed for a while in silence, because I understood that some presences do not need words to continue accompanying. One day, he left a new notebook on the stone bench with a handwritten note, "To whom come after, for whom needs stay." And he left walking, slowly, with the calm step of someone no longer runs away from the past. He did not look back. He didn't do it missing, because when a child speaks again, when a dog find a home, when someone learn to stay, that history, it never ends. It just transforms. And so, between trees, drawings, and silences shared, Isaac closed his cycle knowing something that took time all a life in understand, that even in the places further dark, sometimes a dog is enough old, one mare tired and a hand that won't let go, so that everything start over. This story move you? Then don't leave without subscribe. Just like that we will be able to continue sewing stories like Isaac's.